Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
First, a word from our sponsor. The Daily Compliance News for October 18, 2021, the Better Salary Edition. And the first article our lead article comes from the Washington Post on how to ask for a better salary during a time when companies are desperate for workers. Number 1, when negotiating a raise, timing matters. Number 2, research the average pay for the marketplace. And number 3, show your value. Of course, ending with all this is don't be intimidated. Our next story also comes to us from the Washington Post as a Denver art museum announces the return of 4 artifacts to Cambodia after the Pandora Papers coverage of an indicted art dealer. The 4 antiquities to be returned came to the museum through Douglas Latchford, who in 2019 was indicted by U.S. prosecutors after decades of alleged trafficking in looted artifacts from the Khmer Empire. The Washington Post, which was involved in the publishing of the Panama Papers, contacted the museum, which removed the 4 pieces after receiving information about this. Next up, from the Wall Street Journal, Goldman Sachs is cleared to own all of its Chinese business unit, removing its Chinese partner as a joint venture, and another step towards China's gradual opening of its financial sector. Obviously, this is a very different message than the Chinese government is currently sending about its increased oversight and ownership of the financial industry. Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon said this marks the start of a new chapter for our Chinese business following a successful 17-year joint venture run. So an interesting development for Goldman Sachs, and certainly could change the risk profile from doing business in China if Americans can own 100% of a business unit. And our final story comes to us from the New York Times Deal Book. And this is a case about what is risk. Not obviously, but usually municipal bonds are seen as one of the most low-risk investments. But Napoleon Wallace sees disaster in the finances of U.S.'s largest cities where others do not. When it comes to assessing the value of municipal bonds, he says that the investors and the public are looking at the wrong numbers and overlooking the true cost of a social justice system which has become normalized. What are some of these costs? Well, it includes what he calls physical justice for the city, which he says investors should consider before investing. What is physical, not physical? Physical cost? Well, it includes the cost of lawsuits. It includes the cost of monitorships over police departments. It includes the cost of negative publicity by police departments, causing cities to be portrayed as racist and causing social injustice, leading to massive disruptions in communities when protests hit, as we saw last summer. Interesting analysis.
The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.